You always have something open, and of course, as well as the matter of the day. There's always a lot going on in the Elfman world.
Yeah, I stay pretty busy.
Yeah. We good? Everyone happy?
Yes, sir.
Good to hear. All right. Well, we're here to talk about this. Elfman and Burton box set, collector's edition, fabulous box of fun. From what I know and what we've talked about and everything I know about you, you've never been one to look back very much. What's it like gathering and collecting and sorting through and looking back and compiling that whole thing?
It was very, very weird because I religiously never listen to anything I've ever done, ever. And you know, there were 2 times in the past where I did kind of compilations. They were called Music for Darkened Theater 1 and 2. That was the only time I ever listened to anything I ever wrote. And so here was like going back to 25 years, and it was very, very weird.
What other emotions? Was there pride involved in that? Do you let yourself be proud of looking back at work and what things you went through to get to that point?
I think it's all kind of mixed. It's all very mixed. I mean, I listen to the early stuff, and on the one hand I go, wow, that sounds so primitive. On the other hand, I'm going, yeah, but for what it was, it worked really well, and sometimes primitive is good. So I almost kind of learned a little lesson looking back of, I don't think there are any rules in film scoring about what does or doesn't work, and staying primitive has its pluses, and so it was very interesting, you know, especially, you know, going all the way from Pee-wee to Alice in Wonderland, and the kind of vast differences that those 2 scores would have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Pee-wee, this is the first time Pee-wee's been released, at least as an entirety like this, as a soundtrack for people that are excited about that. That's a big deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, it never had a soundtrack release because nobody ever expected it to do anything, you know. And we even fought, Tim and I. Well, Tim, really, I couldn't fight for anything at that point. I was like nobody. To even have the soundtrack in the movie in stereo instead of mono. Because at that time, the conventional wisdom was, it's a comedy. Stereo doesn't make it funnier. Why bother? Mm-hmm. So that was like the big deal for us, and you know, and Pee-wee's Big Adventure was just even having it in stereo. Wow. And so there was no soundtrack there. A couple years later, they did a part of the score of Pee-wee combined with part of the score of Back to School. Perez Sarabande put those out, so it was only about like half the score was ever released.
Wow. You talk about primitive. When do you see the jumps in terms of primitive to another level to another level? Was it with each score? Were there decade blocks when you look back? Do you see, wow, things really changed with Batman, or things really changed with something else? Are there certain?
Well, yeah, every score. I mean, I can hear that I was really, really trying hard to kind of get better and learn more. So, you know, I tended in the beginning to do 4 films between every one of Tim's films, because Pee-wee was 1, Beetlejuice was 5, Batman was 10, and Tim would go, how are you doing 4 films between each of my films? And I said, if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to do these films, because each film's asking something different of me. You know, Beetlejuice was definitely like kind of wilder. It was demanding kind of more that I could do when I did Pee-wee. And then Batman was like a huge jump. Suddenly, you know, it was the first time doing a big score ever in my life. So without 9 films before Batman, I wouldn't even have attempted it. I wouldn't have had any confidence at all if it were my 3rd film.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you look back, do you see the work involved? What do you see? Do you just hear the music? What images, what feelings do you have when you look back at these things then, once they're in this set? Do you remember the time doing it, or is it all a finished product for you now? How do you reconcile those things?
No, it's like it's interesting. You know, I can remember everything. I mean, the most encouraging thing for me was that I was remembering all the music, which gave me at least a little feeling that my memory isn't totally shot. Like I've become to think over the last 10 years that I can't remember anything, that I'm just one step away from total dementia. And you know, I was surprised as I was putting Pee-wee together that all the cues that were never used, I could remember. It's like, I know this cue. Oh, I'm hearing it. I know exactly where it's going. I was remembering the whole score. Mm-hmm. And so that was encouraging. It made me think that I still have half a brain. And it was fun because I was remembering, yeah, definitely as you're saying, listening back, Pee Wee was just so hell of it, you know, just not caring. I never expected the score to survive. I was just having a good time, and I fully expected Warner Brothers to throw it out of the movie. So I really had an attitude of like, I don't care, you know, Tim's liking it, I'm having a good time, and I can hear that in the score. Beetlejuice, much of the same. I wasn't expecting it to get thrown out by that point, but nor did I care what anybody thought other than Tim. It was a weird movie, it was just fun. Batman, I remembered all the pain of doing Batman. Batman was like an enormous struggle. That was like climbing Everest for me, getting that one out. And then Edward Scissorhands was exactly the opposite. Nobody seemed to even know that we were doing it. And just felt like totally on our own little island because it was going from such a focused, so much attention was on Batman. And Edward Scissorhands, so little attention was on what we were doing. So yeah, I really, it was great recalling all the experiences with Tim, where it was tense, where it was easy, where we were just like having like a kind of a goof, and where we were like really getting down to business.
What's it like when you get to sit down and actually recall that stuff? Because so much of what you guys do is always for the future or the present, what you're working on. And you guys actually sit down and look back. What's that like? Do you guys remember different things? Is that fun to share those?
We don't really look back.
Even for this?
Well, we did for the interview that's in the box set, and that was fun. You know, sitting down with Tim in England and just kind of going film by film by film, you know, in his memory and my memory. And but normally we don't ever talk about anything but the future. So it was like a unique thing. We've never spent time talking about past projects. He's rather, I think, like I am, or maybe that's where I get it from. Like very, very little effort ever thinking other than maybe it came out okay. And it's funny, I've never heard Tim say anything more than, I think that came out, the movie at the end came out pretty interesting. And I've never felt more than that myself about one of my own scores. I've never gone, oh man, I've just done a bang up job. I've thought, yeah, it's okay.
But that obviously suffices for lots of reasons in terms of your own stability to move forward.
I guess, and I think it's just an area that Tim and I are probably similar in. I don't think either of us spend much effort kind of trumpeting our own, what we have or haven't done.
But do you let yourself now, when you look back and when you had to listen to some of the stuff again, and think, all right, that was better than okay, I can see why this was something special?
Well, yeah, yes and no, because I'm hearing that, yeah, that wasn't bad, that was pretty good. And on the other hand, I'm also wrestling with, oh, now I had to do that so much better. So I try to get that out of my head. That's why I don't listen backwards. Anything I've finished, if I listen to again, mostly all I can hear is, oh, God, I wish I could do that cue again. I could do that so much better. Oh, man, I kind of let this go in this direction here, and I should have let it go there. I should have done this. I should have done that. So early on, I said, don't even waste your time. It's like kind of looking back about constantly how you would correct something that's already done is absolutely wasted energy. So it was enough time now that mostly I was just enjoying it.
And then to have stuff on this that's never been released in terms of demos and unfinished things and stuff like that, is that difficult for you to put that stuff out?
That was humongously difficult because, you know, editing together outtakes and stuff like that, that was just fun. Putting together the scores and re-putting together the scores and listening to all the outtakes, I was enjoying that. My agent, Richard Kraft, who really masterminded this entire thing, I never would have thought of it in a million years. He was the one who twisted my arm about putting out the demos. I never imagined that I would ever release those. You know, in my mind, I would destroy everything. I guess now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how I feel a couple months from now when this thing is out, I didn't destroy them. They got thrown in trash bags and boxes and dumped into storage rooms for 25 years, and they all had to get uncovered. Nothing was noted, nothing was archived, but I think various people who worked for me and housekeepers and assistants were just afraid to actually put it in the trash. So instead it got dumped into, I ended up with 7 storage rooms, none of which I'd ever been in, filled with boxes of junk. And in between all the junk was tapes and cassettes, DAT tapes, reel-to-reel things that it's amazing that they even played. And the demos were hard to listen to because the technology, I wrote about this in the box set. I wrote an opening letter. I said, please don't judge me too harshly, because you have to look at this like an old science fiction film. You look at a classic science fiction film, you look at the special effects, and you go, well, by today's standards, that's so funky. But it's what they had to work with at the time. So you just take it for granted. Okay, you see somebody outline floating in the sky, but you could see the outline of them because they didn't have green screen digital technology. You go, but that's what they had to work with at the time. It looks fine. And I think you have to think the same way towards my early demos. In 1985, 6, what we had to work with sonically is equivalent now to the sounds that would come out of a kid's Casio player. If you set it to strings, brass, piano, this would be the absolute equivalent, would be a kid's orchestra, Casio environment. But that's what existed then. So when I was mocking things up, I listen to them now, and it was jaw-droppingly awful, painful for me. And I can hear through the course of the demos, right about somewhere in the middle of the 90s, where it's like, they're getting listenable now. And then as approached 2000, not bad, not bad. Still not as good as an orchestra, but not bad. And but the early stuff, really, he convinced me that somebody who's really, really interested in this entire collection wants to hear this progression, and that I can't just release the stuff that sounds good to my ear. And so reluctantly I did. And like I'm saying, I still don't know. It's what makes me nervous about the entire project, is that I hope it doesn't come back and bite me in the ass and make me go, why did I put that stuff out? I mean, it sounds so bad. Sonically, it sounds so bad. But there's interesting stuff for one who's into that, meaning I tried to particularly find stuff in the demos that didn't make the score. Because to me that was more interesting. There's moments where it's like, okay, this really is almost exactly like what ended up in the score. But the parts that were more interesting for me was, wow, there's whole avenues I didn't take, I dropped. Like in Batman, there's like whole sections that didn't make it to the second round, leastwise the third or fourth round of musical ideas. And that's kind of interesting. It's like the stuff I'd totally forgotten about. Long before we got to scoring, they got dropped. The melody was only half formed, and you can hear it starting, then it goes off into some weird stuff. In hindsight, that's more interesting to me than the replications of what, the cheesy synth demo version of exactly what ended up in the score. And there's a few of those in there too.
And you're conscious of the interest level, though, for people that are film music lovers, that love what you do, that love what Tim does. This is going to be just a real treasure trove.
Well, I'm hoping. I mean, what I tried to do psychologically with myself is this, because I'm not a collector of things. I can't think of like what would get me that interested. And I thought, okay, imagine that. To me, the most fertile composer-director relationship was Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock. That's why I got interested in composition. It was because of Bernard Herrmann and his collaboration. So I said, imagine their collaboration was double the number of years and more than double the number of films. How would I feel about a box set of that? And I would want everything. I would want everything. I would want every scrap of paper. I'd want him sneezing in a microphone if that's what he was doing. And I realized, okay, that interests me. And if that existed, I would want everything. So I had to try to apply that same idea to, if somebody's really interested in our work for a quarter century, they'll be interested in that crazy throwaway stuff or those weird half-formed things. And I eventually just had to let it go. Okay, it's going to be out there. And otherwise, without that, there's no real progression of how I've developed my own process of thinking about music. So I suppose if someone is, however many or few people are really interested in getting into it that deep, it's allowing them into the process of how I began looking at stuff and developing it, and then how I went over the years, and there'd be some interest. I don't know to whom. It's certainly not interesting to me, but I'm assuming it might be to someone else, because to me my process is boring and without merit or interest in any form.
But have you let yourself think of more of the audience, of the consumer, more than maybe you ever have? Because this is obviously a different project in so many ways for you to put this thing out. It must be interesting to at least think about that.
I try not to think about it because I'm kind of exposing myself in a way that I never have. So I'm just preferring to kind of keep that out of my my head, you know. It's like I said, I may end up really regretting releasing all that material. But there's 8 hours of stuff that is never, you know, between demos and outtakes and things like that, is a lot. So it is like a deep trove, whether it's a treasure trove or a junk heap. That's for the individual to decide how they think of my music. But one way or the other, there's a lot of it.
It's obviously it's a unique creation in so many ways. Just talk about visually, just coming up with all this and how this came about, and just how excited you are about what people are going to find in this.
Well, of course, there's 16 CDs, and each CD of each score has between maybe 10 and 20 or 30 minutes of extra material on it, and then there's 3 additional discs of stuff still that wasn't on anything, including really odd projects like the music I did for MoMA, for Tim, the ballet of Edward Scissorhands that never got used, some really peculiar instrumental stuff, partially finished songs for Nightmare and Corpse Bride and Charlie that weren't used, things like that. So there's a lot. And then there's a zoetrope of images. You know, old school zoetrope was where you actually put images and spin it around, and it was like the first moving picture in the late 1800s is where that comes from.
Wow.
And there's a USB drive with all the music on it. That was something I thought, you know, when I get discs, I like to rip them and put them together in playlists and, you know, in iTunes and do it my own way. So I said, why not just do that for them? I'd have to rip 16 discs. So there's a USB drive with everything, and there's a book that was surprisingly, I didn't expect that. You know, it's almost 250 pages of historical stuff of Tim and I. And so that's kind of embarrassing, but it's there.
So you're not opposed to people then making their own Danny mix with the USB drive like you do?
No, that's what I do,
Yeah.
and I think that's what a lot of people do. So I figured let's just make it easier for them and give it all on a single, you know, plug-in.
Now, lastly, just getting the wrap, just this kind of closes the door in 25 years in lots of ways. Does it make it easier, more exciting to look forward to the next 25 with Tim?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it makes it easier. I mean, it feels like we've definitely completed a cycle together, and I look forward to future projects. But people have a misconception that it's easy working with each other now, and that we have shorthand. In fact, Tim says in the interview, he gets offended when people say that to him. It's no easier and maybe even harder than when we started out, because Tim has a much better ear. He's more definitive about what he likes and doesn't like. He used to be much more easygoing about it. Now he has a much clearer idea. So if anything, we take more of a struggle together down many different roads to get to the scores. The thing, in the end, I know that it's going to be a score that I can stand by and be proud of, because he's never made me do something I've hated that I really didn't want to do. And I think in the end he knows he'll get a score that's going to work for his film. But we still have to go through quite a process together. It's kind of a deep thing of how many roads are we going to have to take to finally get to where we need to go together. It's something we do together. It's hard work. And occasionally it's almost agonizing, just in terms of how to define this thing that he's come up with, and how to like define what's in his head into musical, from abstraction to a musical expression. It's not an easy thing, but it's always been rewarding, and because of that, I always will look forward to working with them. But it's not like a lot of people think, oh, you guys just must like bang, you know, look at each other and know exactly what to do. Think of his films. You know, you don't look at Tim's films and know exactly what to do. I didn't then, and I certainly don't now. I mean, looking at Alice in Wonderland, there was no clear idea of exactly what to do any more than there was when I looked at Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It's like, all right, this is going to be interesting, and it's going to be a process, and at the end of that process, I'm somehow confident that it'll be something that I'll be able to at least stand by and feel proud of. And it's true, 25 years, 13 films, and no matter what I might want to change still in hindsight and rewrite over and over and over again, I still feel proud of each of those scores.
Yeah, as you should be. Very good, Dan.
Thanks.
Real pleasure. Well, it's good talking to you.
We want to get a
The real one's probably a lot heavier.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hypnotize.
Makeup's gonna jump.
Yeah, the real one is metal in relief. This is like a drawn
Yeah.
version of it. So no one's seen it yet.
Wow.
I haven't seen it. There hasn't been a single metal finished product to look at yet.
Time for the holidays.
Crucial in HD, that skin tone matches the hands.
We're finally HD.
Oh, took long enough.
Well, there's always that Carson thing where he used to put his hands up to his face. Remember, his hands were white and his face was tan.
He'd put his hands up?
He'd go like this, and you'd see this white hand and this tan head,
Really?
orange head.
I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, all my, the demos that I did for Tim for all 3 musicals, for Charlie, Corpse Bride, and Nightmare Before Christmas are all in there, even the
Great.
rough stuff. That actually was kind of fun to listen to. Even a weird kind of rock and roll version of one of the songs for Nightmare that was probably the one thing I heard that I absolutely didn't remember. It's me singing, and then it's like, I sent it to Steve Bartek, you know, my guitarist in Oingo Boingo,
Sure.
and he's my orchestrator for 25 years. I said, do you remember this? Do you remember playing on it? Is that you? And he's like, maybe. I kind of remember this. So it must have been some impulsive thing that we
Wow.
just kind of went and did. And
That alone makes the box worth it right there.
yeah, that was like the biggest shock for me. It's like,
Uh-huh.
is that me? That's definitely me. Did I do it? Yeah, I kind of think, I almost vaguely remember getting this crazy idea and then running in the studio and doing it. And then by the time the movie came out, the whole thing was dropped. And, yeah.
So yeah, Adam,
Throwing questions at you.
Because the editors will go crazy over that. Somebody's coming in the door. All right. There's somebody crossing in the background there. That looks great. That's actually. The products.
You and Steve generally recall everything, though, even from before then, from every bridge to.
Yeah, I mean,
different
other than
songs?
that was the one thing that caught us both totally off guard.
Yeah.
And I think it's him playing guitar.
Was Tim brought in some other band one day?
No, I mean,
Yeah.
it's something I produced.
Sure.
And it was Making Christmas from Nightmare Before Christmas and turned it into this kind of weird song.
Wow.
So I think it was like